Sometimes, the smallest mistake is the one that rewrites your entire life. The cafe buzzes with the soft hum of conversations and the sharp clink of ceramic against metal. But Emily Carter barely hears any of it, her hands trembling slightly as she balances a tray of drinks worth more than what she has left in her bank account, her worn sneakers sticking faintly to the polished floor as she rushes past tables filled with people who belong here. People who never have to check their balance before ordering a $5 latte. And then it happens. One misstep, one breath too fast, and the cup tilts, time stretching thin as dark coffee spills in a slow, unforgiving arc, soaking into the crisp, perfectly tailored suit of a man who looks like he walked straight out of a magazine. The entire room going silent as the stain spreads across fabric that probably costs more than her rent, and Emily freezes, her heart dropping into her stomach as panic claws its way up her throat. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean," but her voice shakes and her manager is already storming over, eyes sharp, ready to blame, ready to fire, ready to remind her exactly how replaceable she is. Yet the man doesn't raise his voice, doesn't even flinch. He just looks at her, really looks at her, his gaze calm, unreadable, like he's seeing something no one else ever does. And then he says quietly, "It's just coffee." As if it means nothing, as if she hasn't just ruined his entire morning, as if she isn't one mistake away from losing everything. And before she can respond, he's gone, walking out like it didn't matter, leaving behind the stain and the silence and a confusion she can't explain. But the next day, he comes back, sitting at the same table, ordering the same drink, watching her in a way that makes her pulse quicken, not with fear, but something else, something unfamiliar. And then again the day after that, always calm, always observing, asking small questions, remembering her answers, smiling like he's collecting pieces of her life one detail at a time. While she tells herself he's just another customer, just another man passing through, even as something about him feels different, feels important, until one night, when Emily picks up an extra shift catering a high-end gala across town, her uniform pressed, her nerves tight, her world still small and fragile, and she's weaving through a sea of expensive suits and glittering dresses when the lights shift, the room quiets, and a voice echoes across the hall. "Please welcome our guest of honor, Daniel Hayes." And her breath catches as the crowd parts, as the same man steps forward, no longer just a stranger in a coffee-stained suit, but a billionaire, a name everyone knows, a man who owns buildings she's never even stepped inside. And suddenly every moment, every smile, every quiet question crashes together, and the realization hits harder than anything else ever could. She didn't just spill coffee on a stranger. She collided with a life she was never supposed to touch. Emily stood frozen at the edge of the ballroom, her fingers tightening around the silver tray as the name echoed again. Daniel Hayes, the same calm voice, the same steady eyes, but now wrapped in a world that felt miles away from the small cafe where she had spilled coffee just days ago. And suddenly every moment replayed in her mind with a different meaning. The way he had watched her, the way he had asked about her dreams, the way he had smiled like none of it mattered. But it did matter. It mattered more than anything because he had known exactly who he was the entire time, and she had not. And the weight of that realization pressed down on her chest as she took a slow step back, then another, trying to disappear into the crowd of strangers who suddenly felt safer than the one man she thought she understood. But before she could slip away, his eyes found hers across the room, immediate, unshaken, like he had been looking for her all along. And for a brief second, everything else faded. The music, the laughter, the polished world around them, leaving only that look, steady and certain, as if nothing had changed for him. But everything had changed for her, and she turned, walking quickly toward the service corridor, her breath shallow, her thoughts racing faster than she could keep up with, until the sound of footsteps followed, measured and familiar. "Emily," he called, not loud, not demanding, just enough to stop her, and she did, against her better judgment, her back still turned as she tried to steady her voice. "You should not be back here," she said, the words sharper than she intended. But they were the only shield she had left, and when she finally faced him, the distance between them felt heavier than the entire room they had just left. "You lied to me," she added, her voice quieter now, not angry, just hurt. And for the first time since she had known him, Daniel did not have an immediate answer, his expression shifting slightly. Not defensive, not dismissive, but something closer to regret. I did not lie, he said carefully. I just did not tell you everything. And that only made it worse, because she realized he had chosen what parts of himself she was allowed to see, and what parts he would keep hidden, and she let out a small, breathless laugh that carried no humor at all. That is the same thing, she said, shaking her head. You knew who I was, but I had no idea who you were. Do you understand how that feels? And the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Because he did understand, and that was exactly why he had done it. Because for once, someone had looked at him without the weight of his name, his money, his reputation, and he had not wanted to lose that. But Emily was already stepping back again, creating distance where there had once been something fragile and real. I cannot do this, she said, her voice breaking just slightly before she could stop it. I cannot be part of your world. And before he could respond, before he could explain, before he could fix anything, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in a corridor that suddenly felt much smaller than the empire he controlled. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Hayes realized that no amount of power could undo the one mistake that actually mattered. The next morning, the cafe feels smaller than ever, like the walls have quietly closed in overnight, and Emily moves through her shift on autopilot, her hands steady but her thoughts anything but, every sound sharper, every glance heavier, as if the world somehow knows what happened. Even though nothing has changed on the surface, the same orders, the same $5 coffees, the same polite smile she forces onto her face, but inside, something has shifted, something she cannot undo. And when the door chimes, her heart betrays her before she can stop it, skipping once, hard and sudden. But it is not him, just another customer, another reminder that he belongs somewhere else entirely. And she exhales slowly, trying to let it go, telling herself it was never real, not really, just a brief illusion built on missing information and careful silence. Yet the memory of his voice lingers, the way he said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered, and she hates that part the most, because it felt real, even if everything else was not. And by the time her shift ends, the sky outside is already dimming, the city lights flickering on one by one, and she walks home through streets that feel colder than usual, her worn jacket pulled tighter around her as she passes storefronts filled with things she has never been able to afford, her reflection faint in the glass, reminding her exactly where she stands. And when she reaches her apartment, the familiar creak of the door and the faint hum of the old heater greet her like an anchor, grounding her back into a life that makes sense, a life she understands. And she drops her bag onto the small table, her sketchbook slipping out and landing open, pages filled with half-finished drawings, fragments of dreams she has never quite had the time or money to chase. And she stares at it for a long moment, her fingers brushing over the paper, remembering the way she had told him about this, about wanting something more, about building something of her own. And a quiet frustration rises in her chest, not just at him, but at herself, for letting someone from a world so far away step into hers and make her believe, even for a second, that the distance between them could disappear. And she closes the sketchbook gently, as if sealing away that version of hope, deciding in that moment that whatever happened, whatever he meant or did not mean, she cannot afford to think about him anymore, cannot afford to get pulled into something that was never meant for her. And yet across the city, high above streets she walks every day, Daniel stands alone in a glass-walled office overlooking a skyline that stretches for miles, untouched by the noise and struggle below, his reflection staring back at him just as clearly. But for once, it does not feel like enough, because no deal, no number, no success has ever followed him out of a room the way she did. And he realizes with a quiet certainty that this is not something he can walk away from. Not this time. Not when the one person who saw him without everything he owns is the same person now trying to forget he ever existed. 3 days pass, and silence becomes its own kind of answer, the kind that settles into routine and pretends everything is normal again. But Emily feels it in the small moments, in the pause before she looks at the door every time the bell rings, in the way her hands slow just slightly when she pours a cup of coffee, as if part of her still expects something to interrupt the ordinary. Yet nothing does, and that almost makes it worse, because it means he listened, it means he respected her. Distance, and somehow that hurts more than if he had just shown up and forced a conversation she was not ready to have. And so she throws herself into work, picking up extra shifts, staying later than she needs to, telling herself that exhaustion is easier than thinking, easier than remembering the way his voice sounded when he said her name. And one afternoon, as the rush finally dies down and the cafe settles into a quieter rhythm, her manager calls her over with an unusual expression, not annoyed, not rushed, just curious, and slides a thick envelope across the counter. "This was left for you," he says, and something about the weight of it makes her hesitate before touching it. Like she already knows it is not something simple, not something she can ignore, and when she finally opens it, her breath catches as her eyes move across the paper inside. Clean lines, official language, but one detail stands out immediately. Her name printed at the top, followed by words she never expected to see connected to her life. A proposal, an opportunity, a space, a gallery, fully funded, fully built, waiting, and her fingers tighten around the page as her heart begins to race, because she knows exactly who this came from without needing to read the signature at the bottom. And for a moment, everything inside her pushes in opposite directions, anger and disbelief, and something softer she does not want to name, because this is exactly what she was afraid of, that he would try to fix things with something big, something impossible to refuse, something that turns her into a project instead of a person. And she folds the paper quickly, almost defensively, shaking her head as if that alone can clear the confusion building in her chest. But then her eyes catch one more detail, something smaller, almost hidden. Compared to the rest, a handwritten note at the bottom, not formal, not polished, just a few words that feel entirely different from everything above it. No strings. Just a chance. You deserve it. And that is what makes her pause, because for the first time since the gala, it does not feel like a transaction. It does not feel like power. It feels like something quieter, something closer to the way he used to look at her across a small cafe table. And she exhales slowly, her grip loosening slightly as she stares at the paper again, realizing that this is no longer just about what he did or did not tell her. It is about what she chooses to do next, whether she walks away completely or allows herself to step into something that could change everything. And somewhere across the city, Daniel stands at the edge of a window once again, not checking numbers, not closing deals, but waiting, not for control, not for certainty, but for a single decision he cannot make for her, knowing that this time, the outcome depends entirely on whether she is willing to believe that what they had was real enough to be worth the risk. Emily did not open the envelope again that night. Not right away. She left it sitting on the small table beside her sketchbook as if putting distance between herself and the decision somehow made it less real. But it did not. It only made the silence louder, the weight heavier. And eventually she sat down, exhaling slowly before unfolding the paper once more, her eyes tracing every line with more care this time. Noticing details she had missed before, the location of the space, a quiet street, not far from the park she used to sketch in, the size, modest but enough, the kind of place she had once imagined. In the margins of her notebook, not extravagant, not overwhelming, just possible. And that word lingered in her mind longer than anything else, because for years, possible had never been part of her reality, and she pressed her lips together, conflicted, because she knew this was exactly the kind of opportunity people wait a lifetime for, the kind that could change everything. But it came from him. From the same man who had stepped into her life without warning and shattered her understanding of it just as quickly, and she leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be written somewhere above her. But it was not that simple. It never was, because this was not just about pride or anger. It was about control, about whether accepting this meant losing something of herself, becoming part of his world in a way she had never asked for. And yet another thought slipped in quietly, persistent and impossible to ignore. What if this was not about him at all? What if this was about her, about the dream she had carried long before she ever met him, the one she had almost convinced herself to let go of? And her gaze slowly shifted to her sketchbook, still resting open on the table, pages filled with ideas that had never left paper, and something inside her shifted, subtle but undeniable, because for the first time, she realized that saying no would not just be about rejecting him. It would be about rejecting that version of her future as well, and that realization settled deep, heavier than any fear. And across the city, Daniel sat in a quiet conference room long after everyone else had left, his phone untouched on the table in front of him, resisting the urge to call, to explain, to fix, because for once he understood that this was not something he could solve with words or actions alone. This was something she had to choose on her own, and that lack of control felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable, but also necessary, because if she did come back, if she did accept any part of what he offered, it had to be because she wanted to, not because he made it easy or impossible to refuse. And back in her small apartment, Emily finally reached for a pen, her fingers steady now as she turned to a blank page in her sketchbook, and instead of sketching a dream, she began to sketch a plan, lines forming with more certainty than they ever had before, because whatever she decided next, it would not be about fear, and it would not be about him. It would be about whether she was ready to step into a life she had always told herself was out of reach, and for the first time, the answer did not feel as distant as it once had. The next morning does not feel like a resolution. It feels like a beginning she did not plan for, and Emily steps out into the city with the folded proposal in her bag and a quiet determination she cannot fully explain, her usual route to the cafe suddenly feeling like a crossroads instead of a routine. And for the first time in a long time, she does not go straight to work. Instead, she turns down a different street, one she has only walked past before, until she reaches the address printed on the paper, and she stops, her breath catching slightly as she looks up at the space in front of her, the windows wide, the door still locked, the inside empty, but filled with potential that feels almost too big to hold. And for a moment, she just stands there, imagining what it could become, the walls lined with art, people walking through, her name somewhere small but real, not as a dream, not as a maybe, but as something she built. And her hand tightens slightly around the key she did not expect to have, because tucked inside the envelope, hidden beneath everything else, there had been one more thing, simple, quiet, undeniable, and she hesitates only for a second before stepping forward and unlocking the door, the soft click echoing louder than it should, like a decision being made in real time. And as she steps inside, the air is still, untouched, waiting, and she moves slowly through the space, her fingers brushing against the walls as if grounding herself in something that finally feels real. And for the first time, the possibility does not feel overwhelming. It feels earned, not because of where it came from, but because she is here, because she chose to walk through the door. And back across the city, Daniel stands in the same place he has been since the night before, his phone still silent, his mind running through every outcome except the one he cannot predict. And when it finally buzzes, it is not a message, not a call, but a notification, a simple security alert tied to a property he has not stepped into yet, and his eyes narrow slightly as he reads it. Access granted, front door opened, and something shifts in his expression, not relief, not certainty, but something quieter, something that feels like hope, carefully kept in check, and without overthinking it, without turning it into a decision that can be analyzed or controlled. He grabs his coat and heads out, the city moving around him in its usual rhythm while his focus narrows to a single destination. And when he finally reaches the street, he slows just slightly before approaching, not because he doubts himself, but because for the first time, he understands that what happens next is not about convincing her. It is about meeting her where she stands. And inside the space, Emily is standing near the center, her sketchbook open again, pencil moving with a certainty she has never felt before, lines forming into something that no longer feels like a dream. And she pauses when she hears the door open behind her, the sound soft but unmistakable. And for a brief moment, she considers not turning around, considers holding onto the version of this moment that belongs only to her. But she knows she cannot avoid it forever. So she exhales slowly and turns, meeting his eyes again, not across a crowded room, not through misunderstanding, but here, in a place that now belongs to both of them in ways neither of them fully expected. And this time, the silence between them feels different, not empty, but waiting. For a moment, neither of them speaks, and the quiet inside the empty gallery stretches just enough to carry everything they have not said yet. The distance between them no longer measured in steps, but in trust, in hesitation, in the fragile weight of what this place now represents. And Emily closes her sketchbook slowly, her fingers resting on the cover as if holding onto the clarity she found before he walked in. And when she finally looks at him, there is no anger in her eyes this time, only caution, only the kind of honesty that does not come easily. "You should not have done this," she says, her voice steady but not cold. And Daniel does not interrupt, does not defend. He simply listens, because this time he understands that this is not about explaining himself. It is about hearing her fully. "This is not something you fix with money," she continues, her gaze steady on his, and he nods slightly, acknowledging the truth in her words without trying to soften it. "I know," he says quietly, and there is no hesitation in his voice, no attempt to reshape the moment into something easier. "That is why I did not give it to you," he adds, and that makes her pause, just slightly, because it is not the answer she expected, and he takes a small step forward, not closing the distance completely, but enough to show he is not hiding behind it anymore. "You already had this," he says, glancing briefly around the space. "I just removed the things that were standing in your way." And there is something different in the way he says it, something that does not feel like ownership, does not feel like control. And Emily looks around again, seeing the room through a slightly different lens, not as something handed to her, but as something she can shape, something that still requires her choices, her work, her voice. And she exhales slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to let a new thought take its place. "And what do you want in return?" she asks, because that is the part she cannot ignore, the part that has always been there, even if unspoken. And this time, Daniel does not answer right away, because the truth is simpler than anything he could turn into a strategy, and he knows she will hear the difference. "Nothing," he says finally, his voice calm, certain, "not from this." And then, after a brief pause, he adds, "The rest, that is up to you." And the honesty of it lands differently than anything else he has said, because there is no pressure in it, no expectation disguised as generosity, just a quiet offering of possibility. And Emily studies him for a moment longer, searching for something hidden, something unspoken. But for once, there is nothing to uncover, only the same man who sat across from her in a small café, choosing to stay even when it would have been easier to walk away. And the realization settles slowly, not as a sudden decision, but as a shift in perspective, because maybe this was never about the difference between their worlds. Maybe it was about whether they could meet somewhere in between. And she takes a small step forward, not closing the gap entirely, but enough to show she is no longer standing on the edge of leaving. And the space around them feels different now, not empty, but full of something still taking shape, something neither of them can fully define yet, but both of them are finally willing to face without pretending it does not exist. The air inside the gallery shifts in a way Emily cannot quite explain, like something invisible has settled into place, not resolved, not finished, but no longer uncertain in the same way it was before. And she looks around again, slower this time, seeing beyond the empty walls to what could exist there. The soft echo of footsteps replaced in her mind with quiet conversations, the blank space turning into color, into life, into something that carries her name without apology. And for the first time, she does not feel like she has to step back from it. And Daniel watches her without interrupting, his presence steady but restrained, as if he understands that this moment belongs to her more than it does to either of them. And when she finally speaks again, her voice is softer, but clearer than before. "If I do this, it has to be mine," she says, her eyes meeting his with a quiet determination that leaves no room for misunderstanding. And he nods immediately, not because he needs to agree, but because he already decided that long before she walked through the door. "It is yours," he replies simply, and there is no hesitation, no condition attached, just the truth laid out plainly between them. And she studies him for a second longer, as if testing the weight of that promise, before turning away slightly, walking deeper into the space with a new kind of focus, her fingers tracing along the wall as she starts to imagine placements, lighting, the flow of people moving through. And almost without realizing it, she begins to speak out loud, not to him exactly, but not entirely to herself either. "This side would need softer lighting," she says quietly, "and the front, something that draws people in without overwhelming them." and Daniel listens, not as someone directing, but as someone witnessing, seeing the shift happen in real time as she steps into something she has always been capable of but never fully allowed herself to claim. And he takes a step back, giving her more space without making it obvious, because he understands that this is where the balance begins, not by stepping forward, but by knowing when to stand still. And as the minutes pass, the room begins to feel less like an empty shell and more like a place in progress, shaped by her voice, her vision, her presence, and eventually she stops, turning back toward him with something new in her expression, not guarded, not fully open, but somewhere in between. "I am not saying this changes everything," she says, her tone honest, careful, and he nods again, because he does not expect it to. "Not yet, maybe not for a while." "I know," he answers, and there is no disappointment in it. Only patience, the kind that does not rush outcomes or demand clarity before it is ready. And for a brief moment, they stand there again in silence. But this time it does not feel heavy. It feels like something being built slowly, something that does not need to be forced to exist. And as Emily glances down at her sketchbook, then back at the space around her, she realizes that this is no longer just about what happened between them. It is about what happens next, about whether she is willing to move forward not just with him, but with herself. And for the first time since everything unraveled, that possibility feels real enough to take one step closer toward. The days that follow do not feel rushed. They unfold slowly, deliberately, as if the space itself is learning how to breathe again. And Emily finds herself returning every morning before her shift, unlocking the door with a familiarity that still surprises her, stepping inside with her sketchbook in one hand and a quiet sense of purpose in the other, the empty walls no longer intimidating but inviting, waiting for her decisions, her vision, her voice. And she begins to map everything out, not just where the paintings will go, but how the light will fall at different times of day, how people will move through the room, where they might pause, where they might feel something they cannot quite explain. And for the first time, her ideas do not stay trapped on paper. They start to exist in the real world, one choice at a time. And Daniel keeps his distance, just as he promised, never stepping in unless she asks, never turning the space into something that feels controlled or observed. But he is still there in small, almost invisible ways. A contractor who shows up exactly when needed, materials delivered without confusion or delay, problems solved before they become obstacles. And Emily notices it. Of course she does, but it feels different now. Not like interference, but like support that does not take credit. And that difference matters more than she expected. And one afternoon, as she stands on a small ladder adjusting a temporary light fixture, she pauses, glancing down at the room below, the outlines of something real finally taking shape. And she feels it then, not excitement exactly, but something steadier, something deeper, a quiet confidence she has never allowed herself to hold on to for long. And later that evening, when she returns to the cafe for her shift, the familiar sounds and smells greet her in the same way they always have. But she does not feel the same inside them. She moves differently, speaks differently, carries herself with a sense of direction that was not there before, and even her manager notices, offering a brief nod of approval instead of the usual hurried instructions. And when the door chimes and Daniel walks in again for the first time since the gala, the moment is not charged with tension the way it once would have been. It is quieter, more grounded, and she looks at him without hesitation this time. A small pause passing between them before she steps forward. "What can I get you?" she asks, her voice steady. And he studies her for a second, not because he does not know what to say, but because he can see the difference, the shift that has taken place without him needing to force it. "The same." He replies simply, and there is something familiar in that, something that echoes back to the beginning. But now it feels intentional instead of accidental. And as she prepares the drink, the small details return, the sound of the machine, the warmth of the cup in her hands, the careful balance as she sets it down in front of him. But this time, there is no mistake, no spill, only a quiet awareness of how far that moment has carried them. And as he reaches for the cup, their fingers almost brush, not quite touching, but close enough to acknowledge what still exists between them, not unresolved, not undefined, but evolving, slowly, carefully, into something neither of them is rushing to name, And for the first time, that uncertainty does not feel like a risk, it feels like something worth stepping into. The rhythm between them begins to settle into something unspoken, something that does not demand attention but quietly reshapes everything around it. And over the next few weeks, the gallery transforms piece by piece, not overnight, not magically, but through steady work that Emily pours herself into, long mornings before the cafe opens and late evenings after her shifts end, her hands marked with small traces of paint and graphite, her mind constantly moving between ideas and execution, and every decision she makes carries more weight now because it is real, because it matters, and Daniel remains exactly where he said he would be, present but never intrusive, stepping in only when asked, offering suggestions only when invited. And that restraint becomes the very thing that allows her to trust him again, not all at once, not completely, but enough to keep moving forward without pulling away. And one evening, as the final pieces begin to come together, she stands in the center of the gallery again, this time surrounded not by empty walls but by her work, her vision brought to life in ways she had once thought impossible. And there is a quiet stillness in the room, the kind that only comes when something is finally complete, or at least complete enough to be shared. And she exhales slowly, taking it in, not as a dream anymore, but as something she built with her own hands, her own choices. And when she hears the door open behind her, she does not turn immediately. She already knows who it is, and when she finally does, Daniel is standing there, not in a suit this time, not carrying the weight of a public image, just himself, and there is something different in the way he looks at her now, not searching, not uncertain, just proud, and that catches her off guard more than anything else ever has, because it feels genuine in a way that does not need to be proven, and she takes a step toward him, the distance between them no longer defined by hesitation but by choice. "It is almost ready," she says, her voice softer than usual, and he nods, his gaze moving briefly around the room before returning to her. "It is more than ready," he replies, and there is no exaggeration in his tone, just a quiet acknowledgement of what she has accomplished, and for a moment, neither of them says anything else, because the space itself says enough, the walls, the light, the presence of something real where there was once only possibility. And Emily glances back at one piece in particular, a canvas placed near the entrance, simple but striking. The image of a coffee cup mid-motion, the dark liquid suspended in a moment that feels both accidental and inevitable. And she lets out a small breath, almost a laugh. "I almost did not include that," she admits, and Daniel follows her gaze, a faint smile forming as he recognizes the moment without needing it explained. "I am glad you did," he says quietly, and there is something in the way he says it that carries more meaning than the words alone, because that moment, that mistake, that beginning, it led them here, to this place where nothing is simple but everything feels honest. And as Emily looks at the painting again, then back at him, she realizes that what they have now is not built on perfection or certainty, but on something much stronger, something that survived misunderstanding and distance, and still found a way forward. And for the first time, she does not feel like she has to protect herself from it. She just has to decide how far she is willing to go. Opening night arrives with a quiet kind of energy that hums beneath the surface of everything, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady and undeniable, and Emily stands just inside the gallery entrance, her hands loosely clasped in front of her as the first guests begin to step through the door, their voices low, their movements curious, and for a brief moment, she feels that old instinct rise again, the urge to step back, to blend into the background like she always has, but she does not move, because this time, this space, this moment, belongs to her. And she holds her ground as people begin to notice the details she spent weeks shaping, the lighting, the flow, the quiet intention behind every piece, and she watches their reactions carefully, not for approval, but for connection, for that small pause when someone stands a little longer in front of a painting, when something unseen becomes felt. And across the room, Daniel stands among them, not at the center, not drawing attention, just another guest observing what she has built. And yet his presence is different, not because of who he is, but because of how he chooses to be there, distant enough to let her have the moment, close enough to witness it. And as the evening unfolds, The space fills with conversation and movement. The once empty room now alive in a way Emily had only imagined, and she moves through it slowly, greeting people, answering questions, her voice steady even when her heart races, until she finds herself standing in front of the painting near the entrance again, the one that started it all, and she watches as a woman pauses in front of it, tilting her head slightly before asking, "What inspired this piece?" And Emily hesitates for just a second, not because she does not know the answer, but because she is choosing how to tell it. And then she smiles softly. "A mistake," she says, her tone calm, certain, and the woman smiles back, as if understanding more than the words alone, before moving on, and Emily remains there for a moment longer, her gaze shifting across the room until it finds Daniel again, and this time, she does not look away, because there is nothing left to hide behind, no misunderstanding left to avoid, only a choice that has been building quietly through every step that led them here. And she walks toward him, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain, and when she stops in front of him, the noise around them fades slightly, not disappearing, but softening enough to make space for what needs to be said. "You were right about one thing," she says, her voice steady, her eyes holding his without wavering. And he waits, not interrupting, not assuming, just listening the way he has learned to. "It was never about the money," she continues, and there is a small pause, just enough to let the meaning settle between them. "It was about whether I could trust you again," and for a moment, neither of them moves, because that is the truth that matters most, not the gallery, not the success of the night, but the space between them that had to be rebuilt piece by piece. And Daniel nods slowly, not because he expects anything more, but because he understands what it took for her to say that much. And Emily exhales quietly, the weight of everything easing just slightly as she adds, "I am still figuring that part out." And there is honesty in it, not a promise, not a conclusion, just the beginning of something real, and this time, that is enough. The night does not end all at once. It lingers, stretching into quiet conversations and soft footsteps as the crowd slowly thins, leaving behind echoes of something meaningful that had filled the space just hours before, and Emily stands near the center of the gallery again. But this time it feels different, not like the beginning of something uncertain, but like the continuation of something she has already stepped into. And she moves through the room with a calm sense of ownership, straightening a frame here, adjusting a light there, small gestures that feel natural now, like she belongs in every inch of this place. And when the last guest finally leaves, the door closing gently behind them, the silence that follows is no longer empty. It is full of everything that just happened, everything that led to this moment. And she exhales slowly, her shoulders relaxing in a way they have not in a long time. And when she turns, Daniel is still there, standing near the entrance, not in a hurry to leave, not waiting for something more, just present, the way he has learned to be. And for a few seconds, neither of them speaks, because there is no need to fill the quiet. It already holds everything that matters. And Emily walks toward him, her steps steady, her expression thoughtful, as if she is still sorting through something that does not need to be rushed. And when she stops in front of him, she does not look away this time. She lets the moment stay exactly as it is. "Tonight was not just about the gallery," she says, her voice softer now, more reflective than before, and he listens without interrupting, without trying to anticipate what she will say next, because he knows better than to assume anything about her decisions anymore. "It was about proving something to myself," she continues, her gaze steady, "that I could build something real without losing who I am." And there is a quiet strength in her words, not defensive, not uncertain, just honest. And Daniel nods slightly, understanding that this is not something he gave her. It is something she claimed on her own, and that difference is what makes it matter. And she takes a small breath before adding, "And you did not try to take that away from me." And that is the closest she has come to acknowledging him, not just his actions, but his restraint, his willingness to step back when it mattered most. And for a moment, the space between them feels lighter, not because everything is resolved, but because something important has shifted. And Daniel's voice is quiet when he finally speaks. "I never wanted to change who you are," he says, and there is no performance in it, no attempt to make the moment bigger than it needs to be, just the truth. And Emily studies him for a second longer, as if measuring that truth against everything that came before it. And then she nods. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but one that carries more meaning than anything else she could say. And she glances back at the gallery. The lights still warm, the artwork still present, the space still alive even in the quiet. And when she looks back at him again, there is something new in her expression, not hesitation, not distance, but openness, the kind that does not come from certainty, but from choice. I am not ready for everything to make sense yet, she says, her tone calm, clear, but I am not walking away anymore. And the words settle between them with a quiet finality, not as an ending, but as a beginning that feels real. And for the first time since everything started, neither of them feels the need to rush what comes next, because whatever it becomes, it will be built the same way this night was, slowly, honestly, and one step at a time. The days after opening night do not feel like an ending. They feel like a rhythm settling into place, something steady and real that no longer depends on a single moment to prove its worth. And Emily wakes up each morning with a different kind of energy, not rushed, not uncertain, but focused, her routine shifting naturally between the cafe and the gallery. Two worlds that once felt miles apart now somehow connected by her own choices, her own growth, and she moves through both with a quiet confidence that continues to build with every passing day, and the gallery begins to take on a life of its own. Visitors returning, conversations forming, small pieces selling one by one, not in overwhelming numbers, but enough to remind her that what she created matters, that it resonates, and she starts to recognize familiar faces, people who come back not just for the art, but for the feeling the space carries. Something warm, something honest, something real, and Daniel remains part of that world in a way that no longer feels complicated, no longer defined by distance or misunderstanding, but by presence, consistent and respectful, sometimes stopping by with no agenda, just to see how things are going. Other times standing quietly in the background as she speaks with visitors, never interrupting, never taking attention away from her, and slowly, without either of them forcing it, their conversations begin to shift again, not back to what they were before, but forward into something more grounded, more intentional, built on everything they have already faced and chosen not to walk away from. And one late afternoon, as the sunlight filters through the front windows of the gallery, casting soft shadows across the floor, Emily stands near the entrance once more, her gaze settling on the painting that started it all, the suspended moment of a coffee spill frozen in time, and she smiles slightly. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, because it changed everything in a way she never could have planned. And when she hears the door open, she does not need to turn to know it is him. And this time, there is no hesitation at all. She simply waits, letting the moment arrive naturally. And Daniel steps inside, his presence familiar now, not disruptive, not distant. Just there, and when their eyes meet, there is no question left unspoken, no tension waiting to be resolved. Only a quiet understanding that has taken time to grow into something solid. And she takes a small step toward him, closing the space between them without overthinking it. You know, she says softly, her tone carrying a hint of something lighter than before. For something that started as a mistake, this turned out differently than I expected. And he lets out a faint breath, something close to a smile touching his expression. Some things are worth getting wrong, he replies, his voice calm, certain, and for a moment, they both glance toward the painting again, the reminder of where it all began, not as something to regret, but as something to appreciate. And when Emily looks back at him, there is no doubt left in her eyes, no distance left to protect, just a quiet decision that has been forming all along. And she reaches for the coffee cup resting on the nearby counter, holding it out toward him with a subtle, knowing expression, and as he takes it, their fingers finally brush this time, not by accident, not by chance, but by choice, and neither of them pulls away.